All of my work, I think, is done rather intuitively. I tend to plant my camera in front of the subject I'm beginning to deal with, and I use the viewfinder to contain the things that I'm interested in. And I'm doing that very fast. I would say that the more formal my work has become, the more accurate I need to contain the subject matter within the frame edges. So there has to be a kind of rigorous parallel alignment between the subject matter and my frame. For me, it's the photograph that really transforms the subject matter and the potential for those objects to be seen in an aesthetic order. And so at that point, if I can put that into a frame, my frame, I've in essence transformed mundane and uninteresting things into something that's quite captivating. The important thing about photography that purports to be art is, does it tell us something that has a kind of subtlety to it? It's not simply the obvious. It's not the inherent characteristics of the place. It's more about interpretive view of the place, some nuance, some niche that only a particular artist would see. That's what excites me about my work, is when I make a discovery, and that's what excites me about another artist's work. When I see this place that I could have gone to and never would have seen what that person saw. And when I'm out working, I'm looking for my own sense of stimulation. But there are other photographers that have dealt with similar images that I'm interested in, this idea of the found gesture. Works that I had actually begun about 2007, working with what I called found drawings. Those works came about from looking through a chain link fence along the Westside Highway. One day I happened to notice that a particular section of the fence had been destroyed, and it was all twisted up, and the uniform quality of the links had been stretched and twisted, and it had become very much like a gestural pencil drawing. So I thought, well, I'd photograph that on a rainy day, and I'd get a white sky. And so I'd use that white sky background to, in essence, isolate the linearity of the fence and create a kind of found drawing. Well, I'd say that there's a overriding sensibility that I look at the world with. I'm not so much out there looking for images as objects and things or feelings that I have about those places. I don't want to describe what's there. I want to articulate a way of seeing things that everybody can see, but are unique to my way of seeing it. It's always been curiosity driven. My work has been very much about my curiosity for the world and the intrigue that certain objects or places might provide for me. The best part about the work is finding what I didn't know I wanted, but having seen it, I know I want it. I think this schism between photography as art and photography as a craft has been there from the very beginning. And so I think that over time, photography still is it's very important as a documentary medium. And there are people that can do that in a compelling way, and there are people that can do that in a purely factual way. But then there are people that are using the medium for expressive reasons, for how can this medium transform the materials that are in front of the camera, how the materials themselves can be transformed by their expressive use, and how the hand, mind, and eye of the artist can orchestrate all these things to making the object, the finished object of the photograph, do something besides report. To do more than report has always been my interest in photography. I always thought that if my photographs looked like what was there, then I've somehow failed. As you could see, I was walking along and I just wanted to see what was happening there. I mentioned to you before about curiosity. Quite often I'm going from point A to point B, and point B might be a destination of supposed great interest, or it might just be something of a workaday pursuit, going to a store, dropping somebody at the airport, and on the way I might find something that was very intriguing. Even as a child, I found those intriguing, as you might often see little boys looking at construction sites, and maybe they were interested in the machines and backhoes or cranes. Those certainly would have been intriguing, but I think that the materials that I find there, whether it's something that was fairly ephemeral, this plastic material, to things that seem more substantial, the rebar and structural steel, or perhaps some slabs of concrete. These are all the materials that I do find intriguing. The work that I was doing when I first moved to New York was assembled images, almost a kaleidoscopic assemblage of prints printed forwards and backwards, details of buildings or details of shapes from cars or neon signs. And these things were put together in a tile-like fashion. The finished artwork was larger, more like a painting in terms of its scale. Each print would be printed from a full frame, precisely composed and meant to abut another frame. And it would make more like a kaleidoscopic view of the building facade than a representational building facade. I really thought that, at the time I thought that a small photograph itself couldn't really command that much attention. And I also thought that a lot of the work that was being done in the mid-70s was very documentary. It was out of the go across country and bring back the unfamiliar to urbanites. I really wanted to see photographs that were more evocative or more powerful. The work that I did in the Westside Highway of Lower Manhattan was just a kind of casual sort of thing, where I was always going out to the west side of Manhattan because I lived in a dark loft on Walker Street, and it was second floor. I really had no light to speak of. So I'd go out in the afternoon And I moved there in the summer, so the days were pretty long in August. I'd go out sometimes after dinner and walk on this abandoned elevated highway. I just liked going there for the peace and quiet, a sense of horizon, and afternoon light. And because it was an elevated roadway, it was probably fresher air. At some point, I just stuffed a 35 millimeter camera into a backpack with Kodachrome film and started working just casually. I thought it might be nice to make some images out there. The light was beautiful. At a certain point, I thought, I'm getting interested in this. I would instead carry a Hasselblad super wide and a roll film, see what I'd come up with. So I took this very compact camera and a small tripod and would ride around on the Westside Highway with my bike. I found that there was a very kind of contemplative or spiritual quality to the twilight in Manhattan. And the reason being that I had often enjoyed being out at the end of the day. I really liked how cinematic the light would become as the sun started getting low in the sky and the shadows got longer, and then the sun would set and it would start to get dark. That was my experience of the end of day growing up in Long Island, going to school in New England. And I found that I just wanted to experience that kind of thing often, and that's where I found it on the Westside Highway, because there was the sun, a sense of horizon, and a sense of weather. So in a way, I was going to find some approximation of the natural world. So after the sun started getting low in the sky, also the city started to quiet down. And so there was really a sense of quietude that I particularly appreciated. The piece was very seductive, and to linger there and watch the light fade, and then to be on this highway where there were sections of it that, even though it was closed, they had still left the streetlights wired. So I'd be sitting up there on the highway, and it would get darker, and all of a sudden, blink, the streetlights would come on, and they'd slowly get brighter. At the same time, the landscape, the horizon grew darker, and there was this kind of theatrical quality as the sky and the distant landscape grew darker, the pavement grew brighter. So that too was very cinematic. I particularly enjoyed seeing that, and also wanted to photograph that. I think that the work was very influenced by Hopper. I think my sense of the city was influenced by that, because when I think of some of the images you had of just the starkness, and there was this stark quality that could be had over in this area here. I think just because it's at the edge of the city. It was a conscious response that I was having to being there, and also an awareness of how I could somehow work with these qualities, my sensations, the film, the sense of place, a kind of organic process of developing my eye more than developing the film. I was given a camera for a birthday present, I think by a neighbor, and it was one of those plastic box cameras. But I think the camera had a light leak. So as I recall, none of the pictures had come out. Then my older brother gave me a brownie star flash for my 10th birthday, I think it was. And that was 127 film, and had a built-in flash. And that was a little bit more reliable. But I was taking pictures of things that interested me. When we were taken to a family trip in 1960 to Washington, D.C., I wanted to photograph the trolley cars. I ran out into the street of Washington to take a picture of a trolley car. My mom reeled me right back in. I didn't think I was in any danger, but in any case, she took the picture out of the back of the car window. I didn't like the picture. The trolley was too small. Maybe about 1965, my father gave me a Kodak Pony 35mm camera, which was little more than a box camera. It was a plastic camera. It certainly had aperture settings. I can't remember if it had variable shutter speeds or not. I had my Kodak Pony, and then my father brought out for me at camp, he brought me an Argus C3, affectionately known as a brick, which was a black Bakelite camera, also with multiple shutter speeds and adjustable aperture. That Argus C3 gave me much better pictures than the Kodak Pony. By the time I was in junior high school, I joined the photography club. And there was some kid who wanted to sell me his old camera. And I thought, oh, it's just a beautiful camera. I remember it was a single-lens reflex. And it was some brand called Petrie. So it was a Japanese single-lens reflex. And I was convinced I had to have that camera, and I told my father about it. And so my father took me down to the camera store, and the camera store said, it's not a very good camera. Don't buy it. And so I ended up buying this Voigtlander Bessematic M. And that was actually a pretty amazing camera. It was built like a tank. It was one of the last production of the German camera industry before it was finally killed by the Japanese camera industry. Just great workmanship and great lenses. So I was pretty happy with that camera. But then I worked at the camera store, this very camera store. I worked at it in the summer of 1967. And I was cleaning the counters and emptying the ashtrays and doing a little bit of sales of film and stuff like that. And they had another Voigtlander camera there called the Ultramatic CS. And this camera had through-the-lens metering. And so I traded in the Bessematic for the Ultramatic. And I had that for a number of years, but then I had it in my head that I wanted to get a Leica. And there was a distant relative we had in Boston who owned a camera store. And I was passing through Boston routinely to go away to school. And so I stopped there. A guy sold me a Leica M4 and a 50mm Elmar lens and a light meter. And we got it at wholesale. So I was like a 17-year-old kid with a Leica. Back then, it would have thought to be a pastime or a hobby, but it occupied a lot of my time. By the time I got into high school, I was often photographing. I was sent off to boarding school in Vermont, and I particularly enjoyed the outdoors. And in my spare time there, I was making photographs. I would walk off into the woods and take these photographs, and I remember being struck by the pattern of trees against the winter sky, a white winter sky, or even on a crisp blue day. I just remember the pattern of bare branches that they inscribed on the sky, and it's still, I think that white ground of the winter sky probably has returned in my current work. father I think was born about 1920. So photography was still, it was a hobby. It wasn't something that everybody did. And he, over time, bought more sophisticated equipment. He took pictures of us, and nobody liked that because I think that, as a kid, you don't want your father pointing a camera at you, and you don't want him telling you to hold that pose even more so. I certainly can't emphasize enough that my father was the genesis for my interest in any of the arts. And the fact that we lived with great industrial design and architectural design, and that we were taken to galleries and museums. I was also fortunate enough to have been sent away to a summer camp, which involved some great trips, automobile trips. And one of the trips was from Colorado to Alaska. And I guess it was one station wagon full of, I don't know how many boys there were anymore, but I just remember on the road we're driving, and I would see these things. I just wanted to take some pictures, and I think that the counselors and everybody else were just tired of me asking to stop the car, and I just recall things like handmade fences against the landscape, and how much I wanted to photograph those things. And actually that's sort of the same impulse I still have today, that there's this wish to actually go out, stop, contemplate, engage, and perhaps even frame and photograph these things that I would see from the roadside. I do enjoy traveling because there's certainly the potential for finding something totally surprising. But, it's just as likely I'll find something surprising taking somebody to Kennedy Airport as actually flying somewhere else and landing and traveling around in the new place I'm going to. It's just hard to say where I'm going to find my inspiration. The travel can be as nearby as taking the subway to Flushing and looking out the window and seeing a grove of steel pilings, or it could be as far-flung as Japan. But the consistent thing about my work is it really doesn't matter where I go. I tend to make the same kind of pictures, and they're obviously inflected by the place that I'm making them at, but still there's a consistent interest that I have. I would say that a lot of it has to do with the human altered landscape, industry, agriculture, construction. These things all have a common quality of ephemerality to them, that they're operations being done for a workaday function. For most people, they have no interest at all. They're just a functional thing going on. They're the kind of things that irritate people when they're driving and there's road construction and they're forced to go on one lane instead of travel on 3 or 4 lanes. But for me, this slows me down. I can get to look at some paving operation or excavation or rebar or whatever it is.
as I leave my own home and travel on the way someplace near or someplace far, there are things to be seen, and most of them are the same as what we've seen the day before, but occasionally there's a new element. What is it? And I'd like to examine it. Well, I think that looking involves surfaces, so I suppose you could say there's something superficial about my appreciation for things. It could be a great design, it could be just something massive that somehow commands my attention, at least for enough to, as an entree, to engage my attention. And could it be more interesting through increased examination? Well, that's where the curiosity starts to play.
So if I'm out photographing, I'm out there looking at the world with the same kind of curiosity that I've always had. But there are many days that I might go out and on the way I might find something or I might not. I believe in pre-editing, and there are certainly places that have intrigued me and decided not to break out the camera, but the decision is pretty much made before I'm bringing out the camera, what I'm going to deal with. So arriving at a particular place and finding myself feeling inspired is that's the exciting moment, setting up a camera and making exposures. The expressive nature of the medium is what I'm interested in exploiting. That's I think the duality of photography, or the confounding aspect of photography is that it can be descriptive or it can be expressive. The work that I'm doing when I go out seriously looking is purely inspiration driven. I don't know how to really put it into words, but that looking at these things makes me want to somehow encapsulate the sensations I have, and the sensations are playing out across the viewfinder. To look at this work as finished results, those works have to transcend description for me. So even though I may have come into this subject matter with great excitement, if I don't get even greater excitement from the image, if I haven't surprised myself, then chances are I'm not going to be interested in the results.
I think curiosity is one of those words that, to my mind, it's a wondrous word, but I think society regards it as a kind of a nuisance. I mean, there's that expression, curiosity killed the cat, well, satisfaction brought him back. I remember having this curious view of the world, that I like to look at things and to see what they're about. And I think some people have been unnerved just when we walk together. I tend to see what else is going on as we walk. So I may not make as much eye contact as conversations typically have. But on the other hand, there's always something that I want to look at.
Well, I've always wanted to have the expressive qualities of the medium incorporated in my work, and I think that my earliest work was very much about a sense of place, and so in that sense, certainly described the place, but they were very much invested in the feeling of being in those places. Light in my early work was used expressively. It was to create this atmospheric quality that I perceived in the landscape. And initially it was existing light, was street lights, and made at twilight so that I'd use the street light to heighten the illumination of the subject matter relative to the darkness of the sky. But unlike a daylight photograph where we see plenty of detail in the sky, I instead allowed my skies to have a very deep saturated blue, and or sometimes magenta, depending on what the lighting on the landscape was. But the light was used to transform the qualities of the subject matter. And now I still look to transform subject matter and allow the subject to kind of resonate with greater intensity than it has to our general perceptions. So I'm using the white skies to photograph an ordinary fence or an object in suspension from a crane, completely isolated on a white background, much like a still life photographer would do, using a seamless background. I'm using the sky as a seamless background, and so then the qualities of the subject matter are all that we're there to deal with, isolated in a white. When I'm working with a white sky, I feel that I'm actually working with a blank sheet of paper, much in the same way that a painter would do, starting with the total beginning of making a work of art. And in my case, I just think of this white ground, and what can I bring to this white ground to animate the white ground? So it's a play between the object and the space within which I contain it. I'm going through the world every day looking at things with this curious eye, and I find my curiosity undiminished. Although my knowledge about the world is far more complete than it was as a younger person. So there may not be the things to discover that I found at an earlier age. Nevertheless, there still are things every day that can be surprising, or if not every day, some days.